Hello, my Bill 1000 Nation. How's everyone doing today? Hopefully, everyone's having a great day. If not, I hope it gets better from here. We are back with another MrBallen video. This one is titled The Creepiest Attic in America. Motherfucker, you see my attic then, huh? I'm kidding. No one needs to see my attic. I don't even like to see my attic. It's scary. So much shit. Alright, I'm excited for today's video. If you guys are excited as I am, please go ahead, turn them lights down low, put on something comfy cup with something special. Well, let's get creeped out. If it's the creepiest attic in America, I want to be creeped out about it. Yeah.
Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.
Always.
Today's story definitely demonstrates that. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to make the like button a nice fresh batch of donuts,
uploading
but instead of filling them with
quite a bit here
custard,
lately, bud.
fill them with mayonnaise. Also, please...
Yeah, and I did see the other video you posted. We will get that. It's a longer video. It's like 40-something minutes long. And seeing that it's like his grand finale of his live tour thing, I figured we'd save that for a special occasion. You know, Christmas is right around the corner, so is New Year's and all that stuff. And a lot of times, like, creators don't put out around those two if it's, you know, gets in the way of things. And I'm just going to save it back until I know for a fact, like, but expect it either Christmas or probably New Year's. We'll do it like that. That way it's guaranteed that we see it, just in case like he doesn't come out with something cause the holidays or anything like that. Sound good? Sound good.
Subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
Let's do it. Oh, I'm excited. Feels like it's been forever since we've watched MrBallen. I don't know why. Take my soul.
On the afternoon of July 18th, 1997, a man was driving down a road surrounded on both sides by trees in a rural part of Wisconsin called Douglas County. There were no other cars on the road, and so this guy was driving pretty fast. And as he rounded this bend in the road, something out the passenger side window on the side of the road in the grass caught his eye. He couldn't tell what it was, but it was a pretty big object, and after he drove right past it, he just couldn't stop thinking about it. Like, whatever it was, it just seemed out of place. And so for whatever reason, this man felt compelled to actually stop and go see what it was. And so he slowed down and parked on the shoulder. He got out and began walking along the road back in the direction of this object. And as he got closer, you know, he began to see this object again in the shoulder of the road, and it was sort of obscured by grass and other things, so he couldn't see what it was. But as he got closer, he saw the object was pretty big, and it was all white. And as he took a few more steps, and got within maybe 20 or 30 feet, he finally got a better look at this object.
The Michelin Man?
Because the object was a man wearing all white, a white suit, a white belt, white shoes, all white, and he was laying on the side of the road, just totally motionless. And for a second, the driver thought, you know, maybe this guy is sleeping, but after taking only a few more steps and getting a totally unobstructed view at this guy, he saw there was a gaping hole in this man's chest. He was obviously dead. And so the driver turned around, ran back to his car, sped to the nearest house.
This is like some Space Marine shit, and you got like 3 hearts.
A Douglas County detective named Stephen Long was sitting at his desk looking at the photos of the dead man in white. This murder case was less than 24 hours old, but already this was one of the weirder cases that this detective had ever been assigned to. The victim had pretty much immediately been identified because he was carrying on his person his wallet, and in his wallet was his driver's license, and so they knew who he was.
That does make it easy, don't it?
The man in white's identity actually made the whole case more confusing, not less. And Mark had no obvious ties to the area, so what was this rich guy doing 3 hours from home, dressed all in white, getting shot to death on the side of the road? Like, it didn't add up. The dead man was a 45-year-old millionaire named Mark Foster. And Mark lived 3 hours away in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and had no discernible ties to Douglas County. And so the detective was thinking, like, what is this rich guy doing here, dressed head to toe, all in white, getting murdered on the side of some local random back road?
He's rich. I'm pretty sure rich people can go wherever they want. They're rich. Why he's dressed all in white, I don't know. Maybe he was going to a Halloween party, a really later, really early Halloween party, and he was dressing up like the rich Michelin Man or Colonel Sanders. Colonel Sanders wore an all white suit too, didn't he? With the little black stringy bow tie thing. Maybe he was going to a Halloween party as Colonel Sanders.
But things only got more confusing from there. After the medical examiner did Mark's autopsy, he told Detective Long that he had discovered a note inside of Mark's shoe. And the note just said, "Jack Frazier isn't here, but it's Jimmy Bailey? Or a lookalike? I hope I'm okay." Now, nobody, including Detective Long, had any idea what this note meant. It was far too cryptic. But when they ran Jack Frazier and Jimmy Bailey's names through their database, the police discovered that both of those men, one, existed, and two, they lived in Minnesota, same as Mark Foster. And so naturally, Detective Long began to suspect that maybe those two men were connected in some way to Mark Foster.
Gotcha.
Maybe they were involved in his murder, or maybe they were actually his killer or killers. He didn't know,
Frazier.
but it was his best lead. So Detective Long decided he would just have to go to Minneapolis to try to find out more. A few hours later, Detective Long parked his car at the Minneapolis police station. He got out and walked inside the building. Waiting for him inside was the local detective who Mark had already spoken to. And so after meeting this detective, the two of them went into an interview room where Mark Foster's wife was waiting for them. And right away, Detective Long noticed that she was very pregnant and at least 15 or 20 years younger than Mark.
Ooh.
But despite that, she seemed very composed. It would turn out she had already been told about her husband's death, and she was basically resigned to the fact that she was here to try to answer questions to figure out what happened. And so the detective sat down and they began to interview her. And then when they brought up the note that was found in Mark's shoe, specifically when they said the two names that were on that note, Jack Frazier and Jimmy Bailey, when they said that, it triggered something in Mark Foster's wife. She immediately began to cry, and then in between sobs, she would tell the detectives that she knew who those two men were. She told them that she had previously had relationships with both of them before marrying Mark. And she said after she married Mark, Jack and Jimmy became very jealous. They didn't like the idea that she had chosen Mark over them. And so she had always felt like those two, Jack and Jimmy, sort of had it out for Mark as a result of this romantic rivalry. After the interview with Mark's wife ended, Detective Long began to think that, despite this case appearing on the surface to be very odd and confusing, that perhaps in reality, it was quite simple. Maybe Jimmy and Jack were so jealous of Mark that they killed Mark. I mean, based on what Mark's wife had just told them in the interview about them being romantic rivals of Mark, and also the fact that that note was in Mark's shoe and named those two men, it certainly seemed very possible. But over the next couple of days that Detective Long began digging into this theory, that theory fell apart. Because it would turn out Jack Frazier and Jimmy Bailey had absolutely airtight alibis. They simply couldn't have been the killers. Now, Detective Long was obviously frustrated. He felt like he really had it here. But
could they have gotten someone else to do it? You know what I mean? Like, was she dating both of these fellas at the same time, or did she date one, then the other? Like, why are they both jealous? Like, at the one dude, is it because he's just a fucking millionaire? Like, are they millionaires? Or are they just like thousandaires? Half a millionaires. Put them together, they are a whole millionaire. And the other dude is just a millionaire by itself. Is that, like, why are they both jealous of the millionaire dude? Like, they should be happy that it didn't work out between them and her, and she moved on to find someone who can, take care of her. Like, ain't that... Why would you be jealous and angry and pissed off? Was it because he had so much money and they didn't, and they just thought that she left them for money and not love? And here's the other thing. Was she dating both of them at the same time? Because if not, why are they both jealous at the same fucking time? Shouldn't the one been jealous of the other and this shit happened before? What the fuck is going on here, bro? Whose baby is it? Is it Mark's baby?
Was not deterred. He decided his next move would be to try to better understand his victim. To this point, he had already interviewed
creepiest attic in America. What took place in the attic? Why is this motherfucker by the road talking about an attic, MrBallen?
Interviewed a lot of Mark's friends and family, but something he had not done yet was simply go to Mark's house and have a look around. So Detective Long got a search warrant, and on July 29th, roughly a week after Mark was killed, Detective Long, along with another detective, pulled up in front of Mark Foster's large 2-story home in the middle of a quiet suburban neighborhood. Now, from the outside, the home looked totally ordinary relative to its neighbors. But once they got inside the house,
to be a millionaire,
it was anything but. The detectives made their way up to the front door and knocked, and a few seconds later, Mark Foster's wife opened up the door and let them inside. And
bro, if I was a millionaire, I would be living in a castle. Probably not a castle, but it would be like one. It'd be a house that looked like a fucking castle. And I would have unicorns everywhere. Little butt stallions just running all over the place. Oh my God. It would not pay for me to be a millionaire. It wouldn't. I would be on a power trip. I would be like buying all kinds of stupid shit. I mean, I do that now. I get bitched at. But I wouldn't get bitched at if I was a millionaire.
Right away, Detective Long is looking around, and he's seeing all over the walls on the first floor of the house are these graphic pictures and paintings of naked people. And then in addition to that, on some of the coffee tables and various surfaces on the first floor, right when you walk in, are all these pornographic magazines and books everywhere.
Sex dungeon? Is this house a sex dungeon? Now, this is an attic. It wouldn't be a sex dungeon. A sex dungeon, to me, would be like underground basement. You know what I mean? Does he have a sex loft? You know, most rich people just have a fucking library.
And Mark's wife didn't acknowledge any of it. She acted like it was completely normal to have all this stuff right in the front part of your house. And so the two detectives are looking at each other as, Mark's wife is leading them on this tour through the first floor. And at some point, Detective Long just said, hey, Mrs. Foster, why don't you have a seat on the couch and you just let us take a look around your house on our own? And so she said, okay. She sat down on the couch, and then the two detectives, they left the living room, went back to the front of the house, and made their way upstairs. And once they got upstairs, they found the master suite, and there was all this bondage gear inside. There were leather straps attached to the bedposts, there was whips and handcuffs, there was also additional pornographic material in there.
Hell yeah.
But, considering what the detective...
Making me blush. Fuck. That's hard to do. No wonder this poor lady's pregnant. God dang, man. What the fuck? Okay, so Mr. Millionaire is a freak. So he's got like an obsession. He's just not dabbling in some shit. Like, he's got like a whole dominatrix house going on in his house. Like, is this his actual home? Does he have another home and this is just his fuck house?
Detectives had seen downstairs, this sort of felt on par for this house. And so after searching the other bedrooms and other rooms on the second floor and finding more pornographic material basically everywhere, the detectives found their way back to the hallway in the second floor, and they noticed there was a rope hanging down from the ceiling, and it was attached to the pull door.
I'm about to say, is he into a little choky pulley? Man, you need a spotter when you're doing that shit. It can get dangerous. I don't even want to know what's in the fucking attic no more. I just want this to be done. I'm serious. Like, I've never blushed this much in a MrBallen video ever. Oh, my face.
Door that led to the attic. And so the two detectives, they walked over, they pulled the rope down. It revealed this fold-out set of stairs that came down from the attic. And once those were in place, the two detectives began climbing up. And once they got up there, they discovered that this attic was not a storage space like many attics are in American homes.
It was a sex loft.
This attic was a fully functional room that sort of resembled like a satanic dungeon of sorts. All the walls were totally jet black, and there were all these burned out candles all over the place and tarot cards littering the floor. And on the back of the attic, basically all the way on the other side, there was what appeared to be an altar that sort of overlooked the entire room.
So that's how you become a millionaire. You sell your soul to Satan and you build a fuck house. Now we know, America. Now we know. Hell, the world. Everyone, if you're hearing this, if you want to be a millionaire, you have to sell your soul to the devil and build a fuck house. I'm not doing it. I'm fine where I'm at. This video is making me blush.
And on the altar were more candles, and there was a voodoo doll. I mean, it's totally creepy.
Actual evidence video.
Detectives are looking at each other like, what's going on here? And so the detectives, they climbed all the way into the attic and then slowly began walking across towards the altar. And when they got close enough to actually see the altar up close, they just froze. Because sitting on the altar, in addition to the candles and the voodoo doll, were 2 business cards. Their own business cards.
Hey, it's MrBallen here, and I am so excited to tell you all.
You can't stop the video right there for a commercial, Mr. Ballen. How the fuck did their business cards get there? Did they give their business cards to the lady and the lady take them up there all pregnant and stuff, climbing up into the attic in this little weird sex attic loft dungeon thing? What kind of freaky ass shit are these people into? I don't think I ever want to become a millionaire. Once you get rich, you get into some weird shit, bro. I'm weird enough. What the fuck?
About a brand new podcast from Ballen Studios called Redacted, Declassified Mysteries, hosted by the incredible Luke LaManna. From covert government experiments to bizarre assassination attempts, Redacted dives deep into the astonishing true stories of uncovered secrets, lies, and deception within the world's most powerful institutions. Governments and military services around the globe have always cloaked themselves in secrecy. But history shows that when you try too hard to hide something, it only makes people more curious. Luke and his team have spent months researching these totally true and thoroughly twisted tales, guaranteed to keep you on the edge of your seat. Stories like the mind-bending truth behind Operation Paperclip, where former Nazi scientists were smuggled into America to advance US technology and intelligence during the Cold War. Or the shocking story of Charles Manson and the CIA, revealing how a notorious cult leader might have been entangled in a web of covert operations. Trust me when I tell you, the stories are real and the secrets are shocking. Follow Redacted, Declassified Mysteries with Luke LaManna on the Wondery app, or wherever else you get your podcasts. You can listen ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Spotify.
Never heard of Wondery. I mean, I have now.
Detective Long and his partner immediately went downstairs and confronted Mark's wife about the attic. Like, what's going on up there? Why are our business cards on your altar? But Mark's wife, the second that attic was mentioned, went silent. She refused to speak about anything to do with the attic. And so after a minute, realizing this conversation was going nowhere, Detective Long and his partner called for backup. And as they waited for backup, the two of them stepped away from Mark's wife and began speculating like, is this a cult? Was Mark a part of a cult that like ran it out of his attic? Like, what's going on here? And are we being targeted by the cult? Is that why our names are on the altar? A few minutes later, backup arrived, and they would do a much more extensive search of the property.
I'd feel kind of shitty calling them back up against a pregnant lady. Just because your business cards is on an altar upstairs doesn't require the fucking SWAT team, bro.
Property. But other than finding more pornographic materials and, bondage gear, there really wasn't anything else substantive that connected Mark or his wife to what happened to Mark, or what Mark was even doing in this house. Was he in a cult? They didn't know. And so ultimately, Detective Long and his partner told Mark's wife, who still is being quiet at this point, that she should not leave town because they were going to follow up with her soon. Now, in fairness, Detective Long couldn't tell if Mark's wife was being silent and not talking about what was going on in her house, because, she was complicit in some way in what happened to Mark, or if she was maybe being threatened by somebody and she was afraid to talk. They didn't know. But either way, after leaving the property after the search was over, Detective Long and his partner felt like their
Vice
next
President
move
of the cult.
was to try to learn more about
First Lady
cults.
cult.
They needed a cult expert. And it just so happened there was an occult bookstore very close to Mark's house. And so they decided they would start there. And right away, their decision to go to that bookstore paid dividends, but not how the detectives expected. It would turn out the owner of that bookstore was indeed a cult expert. But much more importantly, and relevant to this case, was that the owner happened to personally know Mark Foster. And he told the detectives that Mark came to his bookstore all the time, and also the owner said he knew a bunch of Mark's friends. And so by the time the detectives left the bookstore, they had learned a little bit about cults, but more importantly, they left with a list of names the owner had given them of known associates of Mark Foster who maybe were involved in whatever was going on in Mark's house. And so maybe they had information about what happened to Mark. The detectives were able to track down everybody on this list very quickly. And they were all young people in their 20s. And in each of the interviews they conducted, each of these young people were very open about being in what they called a religious group that they said Mark was a part of as well. Now, the detectives theorized that this religious group was very likely a cult, like they believed, but they didn't call it a cult. They called it a group. But the detectives didn't let up. They kept pressing these people until eventually a new name surfaced, Greg Freisner. Now, none of these people said Greg was in charge of the cult. Instead, they just sort of said, well, talk to Greg if you want more information about our group. The detectives naturally began to wonder if this Greg person was the cult leader, or maybe he was Mark's killer, or maybe he was both. But regardless, it seemed pretty apparent that they needed to talk to Greg because he might have more information about what happened to Mark.
It
took a few days, but the detectives were able to track Greg down, and they brought him in for an interview. And boy, oh boy, did Greg have a story to tell. Based on what Greg told the detectives, here is what happened to Mark on the day that he died, on July 18th, 1997. On that day, Greg Freisner met Mark Foster at Mark's home. And when Mark came outside, he was dressed head to toe in white, something he would do for special ceremonies. And so Mark, he came down the steps, didn't say a word to Greg. They went to Greg's car. Greg hopped in the driver's seat, and Mark climbed into the back seat. And before long, they took off and began driving northeast. And for hours, these two just drove in total silence. Mark just stared out the window, and Greg focused on driving. The only thing that happened during this multi-hour-long drive was at some point Mark pulled out a piece of paper from his coat pocket and he wrote something on it, and then after staring at it, he kind of smiled and tucked it into his shoe. And then a little bit later, Greg pulled over on the side of the road in Douglas County, Wisconsin, on this random backcountry road. And as soon as they pulled over, again without saying anything, Greg and Mark got out of the car and they went around to the back of the car where the trunk was. And the two men are kind of stretching, it's been a long drive, taking in the scenery. And then before long, Greg pops open the trunk. And in the trunk is a rifle. Neither man have any strong reaction to this. Greg just reaches down, pulls the rifle out, and Mark, calm as can be, just begins walking over to the side of the road, to the shoulder. And then once he got to the shoulder, Greg came over and stood right in front of him and just looked intently into Mark's eyes, looking for the signal. And at some point, after Mark kind of composed himself, he nodded at Greg, at which point Greg raised that rifle, placed the barrel directly on Mark's chest, and fired. Mark crumpled to the ground, and he laid there for a second just moaning horribly, and Greg just stood over him watching until finally Mark went silent and died, at which point Greg casually went back to his car, got inside, and drove home. The only time he stopped was to throw his rifle into a nearby river. But once Greg got home, he was overjoyed because he knew the sacred ritual he had just carried out with Mark had been a total success. It had gone exactly to plan. It would turn out Mark Foster was absolutely a member of that religious group, the cult, if you will. Except he was not just a member. He was the cult's leader. And Mark is the one who orchestrated his own death. However, Mark did not view his death as him actually dying. Quite the opposite.
We celebrate life as we celebrate death. Death is nothing to be afraid of. Death is a great crossroads, a change in attitude, a change in longitude, a change in the way that we perceive our spirit. When we reach that portal, they'll ring some golden bells.
He believed that what he and Greg, his most devout follower, were going to do, this sacred ritual, was after Greg fires the shot into his chest and ends this body's life, that his soul, his consciousness, and his power will be...
Did he really think he's going to be born into his girlfriend's baby?
...transferred into Greg. Basically, his soul will go into Greg. And Mark believed once this transfer happened, that basically he would be immortal, that his soul would never die. It would stay in Greg and then maybe at some point get transferred to somebody else, but basically he would be here forever. The bizarre note that was found in Mark's shoe, the note that he wrote and stuffed in there, that note was designed to throw police off the trail. He knew that he was having Greg murder him, again for this ritual, but he wanted to make sure Greg didn't get caught. And so he wrote on the note very specifically Jack Frazier and Jimmy Bailey. Those two people he hated. He hated that they had been in past relationships with his wife, and they hated him. And so he figured if he was going to create a scapegoat for his murder, who better than his romantic rivals?
He came across some smart cops.
He just named them in that cryptic note to get them in trouble. As for all the pornography and bondage gear that was found inside of Mark's home, well, that all played a role in Mark's cult as well. He was a firm believer that the more sex he had with his followers, often multiple followers at the same time, the more powerful he would become. As for the detective's business cards found on the altar up in the attic, those were very likely placed there by followers of Mark, so members of the cult, in an effort to potentially, thwart their efforts to solve the case. They might have believed that by placing those on there and performing various rituals, that somehow would prevent them from solving the case. We don't know for sure. That's the theory around why they were there, but obviously that didn't work because the detectives solved the case. Greg Freisner would ultimately be found guilty for playing a role in Mark's death. He obviously was the trigger man, and so he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. As for Mark's wife, although she definitely knew about the cult and may have been a participant, there was never any evidence that actually connected her to Mark's murder, and so she was never charged with any crime.
Well, okay.
An American submarine, L2, was hurrying to assist a Portuguese freighter.
I really figured it was going to be like he thought, she was pregnant. Maybe he thought that he would pass on to the baby and, be raised up more powerful or some shit. I don't know. But thinking he's going to go into his murderer's body. I don't think that worked out too well for him, man. I don't think that worked out too well at all. And if it did, he's in prison for it. It's like...
Which had been torpedoed near Padstow, when she had encountered UB-65 sitting motionless on the surface. As Lieutenant Augustine Grant prepared to give the order to sink the unsuspecting enemy vessel, he paused momentarily. Through his binoculars, he could see that the German submarine was already listing heavily to one side in the water. He could also make out the shape of a solitary officer standing up on the ship's deck, apparently staring out to sea. Before his excited men had even finished loading their submarine's torpedo tubes, Grant observed UB-65 suddenly shake, violently, as if she had been hit by a huge explosion, before she sank beneath the waves. For the next hour, the American vessel sailed back and forth, searching for survivors, but there were none. The haunted submarine had taken her entire crew down with her to her grave, and almost 90 years would pass before she was ever seen again.
So that's going to do it. If you enjoyed today's story and you're looking for more...
Alright, I did enjoy today's story, MrBallen. Thank you very much. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's story as well. Hopefully y'all liked my little bullshit all throughout the video. And if you did, please go down there and leave a thumbs up. While you're down there going over, slap that subscribe button. Become part of the B5 Nation. We do some crazy stuff. And if you want to know when that crazy stuff happens, ding that bell and turn on all notifications. As always, be good to one another. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. My tongue went stupid, bruh. What the fuck's wrong with me?